We know that the regular Dacia Sandero is amazing value, but today we're looking at two other new versions of the car which could be even better. So if you like SUVs, we've got the Sandero Stepway, and if you like cheap fuel bills, then we've got the Sandero Bi-Fuel. But before we tell you about both of those cars, if you're new to the What Car and you want to see lots of other new car reviews, then do subscribe to the channel. And if you want a great deal on your next new car, or to just make sure you're paying the right price, then click on the link to go to whatcar.com. So first, what is the Stepway? Well, you can think of it as the Sandero on stilts because it's very similar to the regular car, but the ride height is 174mm higher. There's also a few cosmetic differences. So it's got a more sculpted bonnet, the grille is slightly different, there's roof rails, there's chunky plastic cladding, and also the bumpers have integrated skid plates. These roof rails can be flipped to fix across the roof so you can transport bikes or a roof box. And provided you've got a screwdriver handy, it's a relatively simple process as well. It's not the only high-rise hatchback around, so if you're looking at the Sandero Stepway, you might also be considering cars like the Ford Fiesta Active, the Fiat Panda Cross, and the Honda Jazz Crossstar. But you guessed it, the Sandero Stepway is significantly cheaper than all of those cars. Inside the Sandero Stepway, there are a couple of differences to point out compared to the regular car. Firstly, the driving position. Now, the driving position itself isn't actually different, but the whole car is higher up off the ground. You also get a height adjustable driver's seat as standard, so you can sort of just about feel as if you're in something like an SUV, albeit not a particularly big one. The other difference to point out in here is that on these Stepway models, you get some orange highlights around the air vents and on bits of the door, and also on some of the seat trim as well. If you like this fabric on the dashboard, then you need to go for comfort trim to get that. And actually, of the three trims available in the Stepway, comfort looks like the one to go for because Essential is very cheap, but it's pretty basic as well. If you go for comfort, then you get the fabric on the dashboard and an 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard. And it's a reasonably good system, nicely laid out, decent graphics, quite quick to respond. We're actually in a range-topping Prestige Sandero Stepway, and that is a trim that you can't get with the regular Sandero. So if you go for that, you get things like an electronic parking brake, you get alloy wheels, climate control, front parking sensors to go with the reversing camera, and rear parking sensors on comfort trim. But still, all things considered, we probably still stick with comfort and just save your money rather than going for the range-topping version of this car. Now, in terms of interior quality, the build quality in here is good. It feels solid, all feels pretty robust to suit the kind of SUV look of this car. It's not too hard to find quite a few cheaper, harder feeling plastics around, but generally it is pretty good in here. And then when you factor in how much this car costs, that's when everything becomes pretty astonishing. The Sandero Stepway lineup starts at just under £13,000, and the range-topping model that we're in now is around £15,000. So to put that in some context, the starting price for a Ford Fiesta Active is £6,000 more on top of that. So as you'd expect with a Sandero, by new car standards, it is incredibly cheap. But is it worth it? Let's talk about the engines first. And the Sandero Stepway has the same lineup as the regular Sandero. Now, you used to be able to get a very weedy entry-level non-turbocharged petrol engine in the Sandero, but that has left the lineup now. So it means it starts with the turbocharged TCE 90. Now, that engine is pretty good. It will get up to motorway speeds and sit there fairly happily all day long. It's not particularly quick, but it's fine. However, for the same money, you can have the TCE 100 Bi-Fuel. And that's where it gets interesting, because if you go for the TCE 100 Bi-Fuel, then you get two fuel tanks, one for petrol and one for liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG. So this car can run on both. And if you want to swap between them, it's very simple to do so. You just have to press this button down by your knee there, and the driver display also changes to show you how much fuel you've got left of each type. And then to drive, this engine does feel better than the TCE 90. It's stronger from low revs, it accelerates a bit quicker. It's also just generally smoother and quieter. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, on paper, the Bi-Fuel isn't quite as efficient as the TCE 90, but the thing to remember is that LPG is so much cheaper at the pumps than petrol. So there really is massive potential for big fuel bill savings if you go for the bi-fuel. And on top of that, don't forget this car has 2 fuel tanks. So if they're both brimmed, then you could drive for around 800 miles before you need to fill up. To test this out, we put the Sandero through our true MPG test in 2 separate rounds, one running on petrol and one running on LPG. For petrol, we recorded a result of 48.9 miles per gallon. That is an average of what you can achieve in genuine real-world driving, and that's pretty impressive. When running on LPG, the fuel economy is worse. Our test result was an average of 40.9 miles per gallon. But remember, because LPG is so much cheaper than petrol, there are still huge financial benefits to be had. Especially with fuel prices rocketing as they are now, the LPG argument does seem quite compelling. And with 50 litres in the petrol tank and 40 litres in the slightly smaller LPG tank, you can actually, in theory, drive for almost 900 miles before you need to fill up. But anyway, back to the Stepway, and is there any real difference between this car and the regular Sandero on the road? To be honest, it's pretty difficult to notice a difference. So you've got a slightly taller ride height, and that might mean that it's a little bit more comfortable because you've got some extra suspension travel, but it's very difficult to notice. And really, the regular Sandero and this Stepway version are both very comfortable cars. Certainly by the small car class standards, they've got a soft suspension setup, so you feel really nicely cushioned on the road, and it does a really good job of smoothing out rough roads, which is a particularly important skill to have here in Britain. It's not particularly amazing to drive, and because it's a little bit taller, maybe you do notice a bit more body lean through corners, but regardless, this is fine for the types of journeys you're going to be doing in this car. But if you do compare this to a Fiesta Active, then that's got much better body control, the steering's got much better weighting to it as well, but then it's lots more expensive, so you'd expect that to be the case. The 6-speed manual gearbox you get as standard is actually pretty slick and decent to use. The pedal weights are fine as well. As an option, you can get an automatic gearbox with your Sandero. And interestingly, if you do go for the auto, you actually get a continuously variable transmission, a CVT, which is normally an automatic gearbox you'd associate with hybrid cars, but you can get it in the Sandero. If you do have it in this car, then just like every other car with a CVT, it's really smooth and quiet and fine at low speeds around town. But if you want a sudden burst of acceleration, or if you're joining the motorway or something, then that's when it can be annoying, because it sends the engine revs soaring and it keeps them really, really high, basically until you back off the accelerator. So it's not perfect, and considering that the manual gearbox is actually pretty good and it's cheaper, we just stick with that. The interior dimensions aren't any different in the Stepway compared to the regular Sandero, so that means there is still loads of room back here by the standards of the small car class. So I've got plenty of legroom, although not quite as much as you get in the huge Honda Jazz. And if you want to see our full review of that car, just click on the link at the top of the screen there. But headroom in the Sandero is brilliant. If you're just under 6 foot as I am, you've still got plenty of clearance above your head with those tall, boxy dimensions that it has. It's also quite a wide car, and you can notice that in the back, where if you want to sit 3 people side by side, it's relatively easy to do so by small car standards. So all in all, compared to the other kinds of cars that the Sandero is up against, it is incredibly practical. In fact, the only kind of bad thing to point out back here is the fact that the door bins are a bit small. But that's it. The Stepway's boot is the same as what you find in the standard car, which means it's massive compared to everything else that this car's up against. You get a height adjustable boot floor, and you can see in its lowest setting, there really is loads of space in the boot of the Sandero. Now, you can fit 6 carry-on size suitcases into the boot back here, which is more than you'll get in any other rival. And really, the only bad thing to maybe point out is the fact that the loading lip is fairly big, even if you've got the boot floor in its highest setting. But apart from that, there's nothing else bad to say. If you go for the LPG version of the Sandero, then there is no reduction in boot space, even with an extra fuel tank shoved in there, because it goes where the spare tyre would be. So there is clearly a lot to like about the Sandero, but if there is something to dampen the positivity, then it's the crash safety rating. The Sandero received a disappointing 2 out of 5 stars for safety after being tested by Euro NCAP, but there is a bit more to it than that. It was assessed under the latest, much tougher test requirements, but if you examine the detail of the results, you'll find that it outperforms the 3-star Hyundai i10 when it comes to protecting adult occupants in a frontal collision. And the i10 is the only similarly priced rival which has been tested under the new regulations. Nevertheless, more expensive rivals like the Jazz and the Yaris are in another league when it comes to overall safety, with both cars awarded a full 5 stars. Those two also get far more sophisticated active safety systems as standard, including lane keep assist, traffic sign recognition and adaptive cruise control, allowing them to tot up points in the crucial safety assist section of the test, which is where the Sandero loses ground on its rivals. So the Sandero isn't perfect, but when you factor in how much this new car costs against the new car rivals that it's up against, then it is incredibly impressive. It's spacious, comfortable, even pretty decent inside. Should you go for the Stepway version of the Sandero? Well, it's about £1,500 more than an equivalent version of the standard car, and really all you're paying for is a slightly different look and that raised ride height. If you want to do that, then fair enough, but clearly it's not an essential upgrade. As for the LPG version, well, it costs the same money as the TCE90. You get 2 fuel tanks to give it a massive combined range. And of course, because it can run on LPG, you've got all that potential for massive fuel bill savings. So it seems like a no-brainer to go for that version, as long as it suits you. For even more information on the Sandero, click on the link to go to whatcar.com where you can read our full review and get a great deal on your next car. But before you go anywhere else, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you can see lots of other new car reviews just like this as soon as they go live.